My name is Tom Mukwana. I will be the moderator today alongside my co-host, Justine Wanda. She's at the back. So we both co-host a show called The Big Picture. If you watch The Big Picture from the beginning, John Allen was part of the show, but then Justine and I are the ones who are holding the fort. Today, we're here to discuss how to finance the future of Kenya. That's why we are here, and we have a brilliant panel to dissect that topic. But before we get there, it's important that I tell you where the important things are. When you walk outside, to your right, down the stairs, you'll see two washrooms. They're portable washrooms, and there's one for the gents and one for the ladies. If you feel like you need to help yourself, feel free to go outside. Secondly, I would want to set the ground rules for this conversation. It shouldn't be restrictive, but it should make you understand how we would want this to go and how this could possibly go well if we adhere to those instructions, which are, first of all, no heckling. This is a conversation that is meant to be open. Everyone has a point of view. Everyone has an opinion. There will be a time when we do a question and answer session at the end after an hour, and that's when you can ask a question. That's when you can share your opinions of what's happening. Secondly, if you want to ask a question after the Q&A is open, raise your hand. Justine will be over there. She'll move around with the mic, and she'll hand you that microphone, after which you can ask your questions. So no shouting, no heckling. You disagree with someone, wait for the question and answer session. Thirdly, ask your questions briefly. We are running out of time always, and I think we're behind schedule kidogo. So questions briefly, be direct, and you can direct them to either of the four guests that we'll have. They'll answer your questions. Is that clear? Brilliant. A brief explanation of what The Big Picture is. The Big Picture is part of Africa Uncensored. This is a show we do every Monday morning at 6 p.m. This Monday was Easter Monday, so we couldn't have it, but good that we have the rest of the week, and that's why we're here today. Now that everyone is settled, and also I should add, don't pass in front of the cameras. Be aware of where they are. You might block a shot, and that's weird on screen. This is live streamed, by the way. You can share it with anyone at home. You can share it on your Twitter, Instagram, and I'm sure that most people are already watching by now. Again, my name is Tom Mukwana, and now I'd love to introduce the guests for the evening. Firstly, before I get there, actually, it's important to mention that this is a partnership. This didn't just come out of nowhere. This is a partnership of 4 organizations: KenyaCommsHub, BungeLaMayut, TISA, which is the Institute for Social Accountability, and Africa Uncensored, where I'm from. And now to the guests of the evening. The first guest for today is Dr. David Ndii. He's the chairperson of the Presidential Council of Economic Advisors. He's a familiar face in Kenya. You've probably interacted with him through social media, and his economic policies and his ideas essentially run this country. David Ndii, you can come forward, sir. Asante sana for making time. And now, second guest is Diana Gishengo. She's an advocate of the High Court. She's also the executive director of the Institute for Social Accountability, TISA. That's short for TISA. So, Diana, asante sana for making time. This is a very gender-balanced panel, by the way. And thirdly, we have Kwame Owino. Kwame Owino is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs. This is your second time on the show. Kwame Owino, please come forward, and asante for coming. He's now matched the record for the most appearances for The Big Picture. A round of applause for that. And lastly, Wangare Kebushi. She's Africa Fiscal Policy. She's an Africa Fiscal Policy economist, and she's also the managing director of Expertise Global. Wangare, please come forward. Again, it's important that I tell you what this conversation is about. This conversation is anchored around the Infrastructure Fund Act that was passed by the president around December, and it might influence how infrastructure pops up across the country because some funds will apparently be sequestered for that purpose. David Ndii, I'd like to first start with you because you posted on Twitter that this was something that was in the manifesto, which you were very much involved in. How is this supposed to work?
Thank you very much. The Infrastructure Fund Act provides 4 objectives of the fund. Number 1 is to accelerate and scale up infrastructure investment. Number 2 is to crowd in non-traditional capital. Number 3 is to take a lot of commercial infrastructure off budget. And number 4, it is to increase our capacity to structure and execute large and complex infrastructure projects. Those things are interconnected, and they all have to do with the infrastructure deficiency that we have. Number 1, and number 2, with the debt distress that trying to finance large, heavy capex infrastructure projects on budget using sovereign debt has created. So how is this supposed to work? It is supposed to work by taking commercially bankable infrastructure projects out of the budget, because they shouldn't be there if they are bankable, and there is other kinds of capital that can finance them other than public debt. If you look at the current budgets or any budgets and you score it today, we are running a budget deficit of about 5 to 6% of GDP. We struggle to bring it down. It's very difficult. One of the reasons is if you go in there, you will see lots of commercial infrastructure projects. You will see power projects, lots of them. You will see various things, water and sewerage, things which we actually pay for. Those projects account to about 1/3 of the deficit, about 2% of GDP. So you can see if you could remove them, you already begin to achieve your fiscal consolidation objective. So what have we done? We have taken some capital from privatization, the ones we've done, and that's the goal. We have put this money in a public fund outside of the budget. Typically, funds like this, for every $1 we put in a fund like that, you're able to leverage that about 10, sometimes 15 times to attract other types of capital. So for $300 million, $3 billion, 300 plus about, our target is to have $3 billion in there. If you leverage that 10 times, in one cycle, you can finance $30 billion roughly worth of infrastructure. That is probably will absorb, that can deal with virtually, I think, most of the large commercial infrastructure, bankable infrastructure projects we need. We want to do a lot of irrigation projects, which we have heavily underinvested in irrigation in this country. Most of our energy projects can go there. Transport and logistics, the airport, we tried to finance that, we couldn't. Ports, stuff like that, as well as national highways, because we are struggling to finance both national highways and rural access roads and all other roads on budget. So one kilometer of highway will cost you $500 million. That you can do 50 kilometers of rural, sort of other type of road. So there are huge trade-offs there. So that's how we plan to use this.
I'd like to turn to you, Wangare. Is there feasibility in what Dr. is saying? Is it on?
Is this working?
Oh, brilliant.
All right. Is there feasibility in what Dr. is saying? I think for sure. I think the National Infrastructure Fund in and of itself is one of those structures that allows for us as a nation to kind of take a lot of the financing that is related to debt outside of the budget. The question or things that we need to also really think about is the effects of privatization. So if you have public and private funding in the NIF, the National Infrastructure Fund, we need to be cognizant that it needs to have really strong regulation. and also really strong governance, because I think that is part of what we're really struggling with as a nation. Every day we are hearing from the Controller of Budget, Auditor General, or some of the challenges that we're having in terms of the implementation of the budget and challenges there. So if we are able to have strong prioritization of projects, what projects are we going to invest in? What have we invested in when we were having debt finance projects before, and what have we gotten wrong? The Wanjiko, the Wananchi around also getting fatigued in terms of the debt serving obligations that are really hitting their pockets. So can we have also infrastructure that much closer hits their pockets than some of the long-term infrastructure that we're seeing that takes a very, very long time to be pulled down into their pockets to see the benefits from there. So I think in terms of the National Infrastructure Fund, I think it's a good idea. I think it's something that also has been tried in different jurisdictions like Nigeria and other places. But if we don't have good regulation that makes sure that the social mandate is kept, that fees and charges from having private capital in the fund doesn't block out the vulnerable from accessing these services. We don't have monopolistic behavior, we don't have job losses, because bringing in private money really pushes for a more profit, a larger profit view than what we have as a government when you think about more of the social welfare.
Yeah. We'll get into a bit of the guardrails around the fund in itself, but Kwame, is there feasibility in what Daktari is saying? And I'd like to ask this and also add that one of the important channels of funds that go to the Act, Daktari, is privatization money, right? So my question is, are we always going to be in that cycle of privatizing so it can go into the infrastructure fund, or is there any other channel for funding this? But yeah, I'd like to tie that to the question to you, Kwame.
Okay, I mean, I think Kenya hasn't done enough privatization. How that money is used, we can contest, but there's one of the brilliant things this administration has done is to be unapologetic about privatization. A little more should happen. In fact, they should be much faster. But coming back to when the National Infrastructure Fund law was first established, and Parliament, as usual, gave us an opportunity to speak, I and a few colleagues who were here sat and asked ourselves, if all you want to establish is to ease the pressure on the fiscal deficit, then this makes sense. However, our view at the Institute of Economic Affairs is this is not the right time to establish an infrastructure fund, especially if you're funding it off the proceeds of privatization. Because what you should do is pay down the debt. The debt is actually killing public sector. So if you're going to earn $2 billion, sensible amount from getting a few of the shares of Kenya Pipeline and all that, which were brilliant things in my view, then pay down the debt. And so that you reduce basically the real burden. Because regardless of the fact that these are national infrastructure projects and they have returns, if you're paying debt at 11%, few infrastructure projects will give you 11%. So I'd rather the superior decision based on that calculation is to pay the debt. But we lost the argument. So let's come to the fund itself. If you look at the 4 objectives that David has outlined, they're the most sensible ones that you do for the infrastructure fund anyway, if you're going to establish it. So our beef with it, to use Gen Z terms, is the fact that it comes, it shouldn't be the priority. We are paying 10%, 12% on debt. And then you're taking out, instead of easing that pressure immediately, you're actually transferring funds out there, regardless of the other questions that, my colleague has mentioned about the governance questions. So it's just basically about the sequencing. And that's a question we have, that's something we quibble with.
Yeah, and that appears in this act, which we'll get to again, Daktari. Diana, do you agree with the sentiments?
Yes, privatization, is it something that is needed? Yes, based on where we are, most of our liabilities, including pending bills, are around state-owned enterprises. And so privatization is needed. Is this sustainable, the National Infrastructure Fund? I am not sure. As a taxpayer, I am not sure. Why? Because Whereas Dr. Ndii speaks with clarity on what the fund will do, the entire process has been fumbling, and they are very clear. We need money for infrastructure. How we get it seemed, in my opinion, by hook or crook. And it didn't start with the National Infrastructure Fund. It started with the Government-Owned Enterprises Act. We moved into a mechanism of ensuring that all parastatals move into limited liability companies. Easy for, in my opinion, for ease of management and ease to privatize. The process of privatization for those state-owned enterprises will be significantly shorter. Then we set up the Privatization Act. And my own reading, one of the reasons why I'm here, fellow taxpayers, is so that Dr. Ndii can tell us, is the National Infrastructure Fund, would it be categorized as a state-owned enterprise? Because it will be conducting commercial ish activities of infrastructure development. But why I doubt the sustainability is the only new thing is that there will be revenue or resource available that does not have the rail guards of the public finance oversight. That seems to be the one huge innovation. So I wonder, is the problem we have around our fiscal pressures created because government is bogged down by transparency, accountability, and participation of the people, which is the one thing the National Infrastructure Fund takes away significantly from us? So based on that, I am not very, very sure that the Governing Council will be the best place for setting merit on where irrigation should go, and not what the constitutional architecture for setting national priorities is.
Brilliant, because you touch on a thing that we'll get to in a bit. But Daktari, there's something that she asked, why is it a limited liability company? And I see here in the actual act that the fund shall be a body corporate with perpetual succession and common seal, and shall in its corporate name be capable of, and then lists its role. What does that mean?
I think there's quite a bit of communication. The NIF is a statutory body established by an act of parliament. It's not a limited liability company.
Okay.
Yeah? So it is a state corporation. It's a national DFI. It's a development finance bank for infrastructure. The capital we are putting in as the government from privatization is going to sit in the central bank as a custodian. Okay? The proceeds from privatization, they're going to sit in the central bank. It is only going to be drawn once it is approved for either as part of our operational budget or for investment. Okay? And go under PFM rules. So the government money will be governed under PFM. Okay? By the auditor, it will be Auditor General. For money to be drawn for an investment or for its own budget, it will go to the controller of the budget. It is absolutely a statutory body. Now, once money is approved for investment, it will either go directly into a project or into a sub-fund established with others. That's how you crowd in capital. So you say, we want to set up a fund for renewable power. And you get investors of renewable power to put in money, and we target 5 billion. And the National Infrastructure Fund contributes 10%. So now what we have is we have captive money sitting in Kenya available to invest in our renewable power projects, instead of running around looking for money project by project. yeah, you actually crowd in the money, but it has been approved. Then the sub-fund will have its own governance rules. If you have other DFIs investing, the AFCs, the World Banks, and that kind of these people, that sub-fund will have its own investment committee. So the projects will go there, will be approved by that investment committee again. But for our money to be drawn, and then the revenue, the profits that our share of investments will be put back into our public fund. And for it to be taken out again for investment, it will have to go through a public approval process.
Daktari, this is not something new. What you're saying is not new. The auditing is something that the Auditor General does all the time, but money is still getting stolen. That's something we'll get to in a bit. But this feels like duplication of roles. Why is it that we have Kera and Kenhand at the same time we're having this fund that is supposed to go over?
Because the public, the National Infrastructure Fund will only invest in commercial projects and co-invest with other capital off budget. It will not invest. Kera does not invest. Kera gets money from Treasury. So what we are saying is, let me give you an example. We're talking about privatization. Another thing which is misunderstood is the fund itself has no bearing on privatization in its project. I'll give you an example of the projects we have in the pipeline now. One, people complain about IPPs, power projects. Okay? Why do we use IPPs? Because we cannot fund those power investments on budget. But we have a power utility called KenGen, which is publicly listed. So one of the things the NIF will enable us to do is to capitalize KenGen, to do a lot more of our power projects through KenGen, as opposed to through IPPs by working with KenGen and crowding in private capital from other sources, both equity and debt. One of the projects we are working on with KenGen right now is a battery storage project for its resources, in which it vents geothermal. Let me just complete something and answer something somebody said. Now, this project was going to be funded with World Bank money, concession of funding. Okay? So KenGen is competing with the borrowing that we should be using to finance health and education. So we're going to take that out of the budget so that World Bank money, which is cheap money, can finance health and education. So these heavy capex infrastructure projects in the budget, which can be funded with capital because we pay for them, are actually crowding out social investment that we should be using that fiscal space and concession or debt for.
Right.
I don't know whether that brings clarity.
Makes sense. It's good on paper, Daktari, as
It is not on
always.
paper. Let me make another point about accountability. The National Infrastructure Fund is not going to make any independent investment decision. It will only be able to invest in a project where the other investors deem bankable. So, if other investors, DFI, all sorts of other people, infrastructure funds, if they deem the project as bankable, then we co-invest with them. If it is not bankable, then the project doesn't fly.
Right, Daktari.
So there is no possibility of political interference.
We'll get to that.
With the investment decisions of the NIF.
I think a lot of people disagree with that because of how this act is written. But then now we'd like to turn to the crowd. Justine?
So I think both Kwame and Dr. Ndi have been very embracive of the private capital for this fund. And my question would be, where do public interests lie when private capital takes center stage? Will people be deprioritized just because it's a big project that the council has taken up, or will they also be considered, considering public participation has been kind of removed? This is a question to both of you, Dr. Kwame. And also, I would also like to hear from Diana too.
There are no governance safeguards that have been removed. Because even today, if there is going to be a power project, whether by KenGen or whether by private IPP, it goes through all the approval processes, ESI, none of that changes. The only thing we are doing is the following. The way the business process, for instance, for PPPs works now, is we put out an RFP, and then people bid, somebody is awarded, they go through those processes, then they go look for financing abroad or wherever. They may or may not get it. Typically, the equity return that they ask for are very high. What we're saying is we can mobilize that capital beforehand so that we have captive capital sitting in Kenya, so that when we have now infrastructure projects, we don't go to the market project by project. And that's why we say accelerate and scale. Because when the Jubilee government promised to do about 20 dams. It did not complete a single one. Why? Because when you take projects for appraisal and project development to AFDB, to the World Bank, one at a time, they take 3-4 years. So if you queue 10 projects, that's 30 years. If we can raise a water fund or irrigation fund, and that's what we're planning to do. We have packaged 18 projects. We will use one instrument. It is possible to start those 18 projects simultaneously. But no project will not be subject to all the investment processes that are required.
Those are, again, not new sentiments. This is something that has happened even with the bad investments and corrupt projects. And then we come to you, Wangari. It's on, I believe.
Thanks. Well, I think we Kenyans need to be...
Is it on? All right.
Well, I think we Kenyans need to... okay, so I think I see why people are... the cynicism that people have for private capital. But the truth is we don't have a government that has sufficient money to meet, quote unquote, what we call our development demands. So that's one thing. Now, that's not to say that we allow for, I mean, it's a C word, right? People are scared about corruption and all that. Those are safeguards. I mean, they're safeguards. I don't think they're adequate for this bill, but that's a general public sector problem. It's not necessarily about this law. So that's the first. And the second is, I think the clarity, and this is something perhaps David can take us and your colleagues, the clarity here is this. We are talking about funding commercially viable projects, which means people will be paying for them regardless. That's one. The other thing about the private sector that we need to be conscious about is there's no private sector person who's interested in discriminating against others because they saw those as, quote unquote, my customers. So government does, and it does that very effectively in Kenya. So if you ask me, if there are projects that could be done using private capital, for instance, and it would be efficient, then I have no qualms about saying, let that proceed. We are in a place where all we need to ask ourselves, and perhaps that's coming in the later part of our discussion, is the design the appropriate one for the goals which I have no quibbles with, as I said. We lost the debate, which was we should concentrate on bringing down the public debt, especially when you have float from privatization. But if you do, and we have the four obligations, the four objectives that the fund says, then they are sensible objectives in themselves. What we need to ask ourselves is this thing been designed in the proper way to actually get us those objectives? I think there are material things that we still need to discuss about the design of the administration and the institution itself. But that's perhaps a different conversation. Okay, so if you look at it, there are two main governing things. There's the National Council, the council, chaired by the Cabinet Secretary, and then of course we have the Governor of the Central Bank on the one side and the AG, and 5 other people, right? Is it 5 or 6? 5 other people, or 6 other people. And then we have the board, because this institution will have a CEO. We have a board. And together with that CEO are another 6 other people. No, 9. 3 people from the public sector and another 6 from the public sector. So you can see this. It's not just very, what should I say? It's not just filled with public sector people, which is okay. These are public sector funds. Part of it is public sector funds. But I think the cabinet secretary has a lot of roles. He chairs the council and then nominates people who sit on the other side on the board. So to say that this institution is isolated from politics is a lot more wishful than we know the political economy in Kenya works like.
Yeah.
So that's something we could think about fixing.
That's something I'd want us to get into after you, Ongare.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that is one of our primary concerns in terms of the influence that can come in through these appointment structures. I mean, we know we've been lived here. We know how it goes, right? So I think those are ways where those are places where there are critical weaknesses. I think in the NIF in terms of how are these decisions made, who is making this, who is prioritizing, and at the end of the day, how are these decisions going to be made that we feel are transparent, we feel that are bankable, we feel that we can work behind. But one of the other things I also wanted to mention was mentioned earlier, the KRB that is collecting the RMLF money, Road Maintenance Levy Fund. We have some, I think, port levies that are for the port improvement, and we have these various structures that are for infrastructure development. And my concern is that we have they're doing the same thing but in separate places. So is there a space for us to consolidate or to bring these together? I know the NIF is talking about bankability and bringing, the private investors will invest in the project that they think will bring good return. And not all of the ones that we have in our budget will bring good return. I think we must be honest about that, right? But then if we have this kind of infrastructure that is still on our budget books, we still have to continue paying the debt of the 1/3 of projects that are in our budgets. Every year, we still have to continue with that debt servicing. So we're debt servicing, plus now we're using the other assets that we have for the National Infrastructure Fund on a hope and a prayer that it's going to work. And we hope, I'm a Kenyan and I want this NIF to work. But those are real primary concerns that we feel that I think should be addressed. And I think the last one, the other concern I had was, if we have the NIF and it has a lot of money, it has a private money, it has a public money, and it's waiting to be deployed for large infrastructure projects. But on the other side, we have crippling debt service obligations. And you have this kind of imbalance where you have a big pot of money that can't be touched, that it can only be used for certain things. But on the other side, we're struggling to pay for healthcare, we're struggling to pay for social protection, and all of those things. There's an imbalance that comes. So I think there's some work that we need to do to kind of consolidate and bring these things together.
Before we get to you, Diana, do you want to respond to that?
Big pot of money should pay debt. Our public debt now on budget is 12 trillion. The money we are committing is 300 billion. If we pay down debt, our debt would come down to 11.7 trillion. It is minuscule. Okay? But what you can do with this money is prevent maybe another 4-5 trillion of debt hitting the budget. Because I can assure you, if we don't do this, the pressure to fund infrastructure will not go away. We will fund SGR on budget again. Okay? We will fund the airport on budget. We will fund $5 billion worth of transmission lines on budget. So, 300 billion shillings will enable us to take out potentially 5 trillion shillings of debt that would have hit the budget over the next 5 years. So, my view on reducing debt with Kwame is the same, but Kwame is looking at historical debt. He doesn't sit where I sit and see the pressure to borrow for infrastructure.
Well,
and I can tell you,
a good percentage of the debt that he's speaking about is taking every 100 shillings that we get in the country. But then,
for me,
a good percentage of the amount that is collected in the country goes to repaying these
But
debts.
the point
So it is important.
the point I was responding to is this money that we are leveraging to fund infrastructure will preempt that debt growing more than if we had used it to pay off existing debt. That is accounting. The other point which has been raised, and I want to give an illustration on political interference. A politician walked up to me and said, this thing was very difficult for us to pass. So what we need in our area for this thing to fund is an airport. So I told him, that's absolutely fine. If you can find investors to co-invest with us in that airport, and you know the fund can only take 25% of the equity, then it will go. If you guys can put money to investors, private investors, so who will control the money? Who will make the decisions? The money will make the decisions. The fund will be a minority investor.
But the money goes where the council and the board.
No.
approve.
It goes where investors say. If you are a minority investor,
Well, that is not true, Dr.
it is absolutely true. Let me add another point. Unless you don't know anything about project finance, that is absolutely true. I was discussing project finance with this lady, and maybe she can educate you. 3, what do we mean by private capital? Last year, the assets under management by our pension funds grew by 700 billion shillings. That is $5.3 billion. Today, we have no means of giving our pension funds exposure to infrastructure assets. Why? Because we borrow from donors for infrastructure. Yet our pension funds are sitting on long-term funds. The most they can do is buy things we call infrastructure bonds, but they are fake infrastructure bonds. They are just regular treasury bonds, baptized infrastructure. What the NIF is making it possible to do is to actually mobilize that money. We are already in discussion with the pension fund people to change the pension fund investment rules. The biggest investor in the sub-funds that we will create will be Kenyan pension assets. And I'll give you an example finally of the structure, how we are financing the airport. We are financing the airport by setting up spinning off JKIA from the KEA into an independent business, JKIA Limited. We're going to put 40 billion shillings of equity in that. It's $1.2 billion, the first phase. Raise the rest in debt. Of that 40 billion, NIF is putting 1/3, and public pension, Kenyan pension funds are putting the other 2/3.
All right, thank you, Daktari. Diana, I'll pose this to you again, Daktari, in a bit, but look, the council that Kwame is speaking about, the governing council, is appointed by the president. The CS sits on this council alongside the AG. The council appoints the board members, the board directors, who are then on this infrastructure board, which then oversees, and as the council is appointing the board, it also oversees the infrastructure policy that comes from the board. Then the board decides where the investments are done. And then the cabinet secretary again picks board directors, and then cabinet approves the investment policy at the end of the day before it goes to the National Assembly. So I think that makes your point about political control not being there laughable. But Diana, do you agree with what he said, and what's your reaction to it?
I take home that the National Infrastructure Fund will be controlled by the money. That's my takeaway from this conversation. So we will prioritize infrastructure projects based on the money. National interest, national priorities, I am not sure. It is how well we resource mobilize, okay? But based on what you've said around the governance, first, let me say, on this panel, I am not an economist. So I am using English. There are things I will not get. But because on this other side, I know there are many people who are like me, let us flow together. So one, the National Infrastructure Fund, for the record, all privatization proceeds, all, are going to the National Infrastructure Fund. When initially the Privatization Act was enacted, that money was going to the Consolidated Fund, because the purpose of the Privatization Act is what both Dr. Ndii and Kwame have highlighted. First was to ease the fiscal pressure. The number two was to think about how we can invest in infrastructure. But something has happened, and we have skipped priority one, and immediately now, all the proceeds of privatization go to the National Infrastructure Fund to create the needed base very, very fast. It may look like 300 billion initially, but if we go do full privatization with this particular provision, there is no leeway to go back and correct the fiscal continue to affect all of us. Secondly, on the governance structure and who has a say therefore, I don't want us to lose, and I know Ogada is here and he'll speak to this when given a chance. Don't lose the strict of government-owned enterprises enacted first, 2025, I think August or thereabout, Privatization Act enacted in November. 2025, the National Infrastructure Fund is a third one that was now enacted in March. All these are linked. And the people who sit and control are the same political figures. Actually, I think now we need to rethink the evaluation criteria of the Cabinet Secretary Treasury. Because this is like investment money which might grow to be higher than our total national budget. Yet all decision making will largely lie with the council and the board and reporting to the Cabinet Treasury. He reports to Cabinet, he reports to Parliament, he reports to us, he asks questions, he is everything in that particular process together with the Attorney General. But he has still the same powers around the state-owned enterprises with who? The Attorney General. Privatization, a similar regime of management is created that way. But remember, one of the things that has been sold that will be different is the intellectual power that will be injected into the National Infrastructure Fund. The 3 will be diluted by the 6 who will have such huge prowess in investment. My understanding is the people who will be appointed immediately, we will all take our capital to the National Investment Fund. Does that look likely? Does that look likely in this country, where we are saying, after what happened with Adani, and the public-private partnership where we could go and make noise, now we will have a few experts who can take over the pressure that we take to Parliament. But where does the buck stop? One person, the Cabinet Secretary. Surely there something is very off, and we can rework it. We can learn from other models. I personally like the Brazil model that the Brazilian politicians are trying to interfere with. Okay. We could strengthen that if at all that's the way we go. But ultimately, we must deal with our debt question. Our debt question will not be cured by the National Infrastructure Fund. But this was the point of education. The ile pesa this fund gets, italipo aje, and actually the Cabinet Secretary guarantees debt on behalf of this fund. Will it accumulate? What? Just educate me. the economist.
It's good that we have the economists
Yeah.
here, but we'd like to hear from the
Itatoka
crowd
wapi
first.
na italipwaje?
Before we get to the question and answer, please bear with us. Justine?
Just before we get to the question and answer segment, I just wanted to let you know that we're live on all the social media platforms, and there are some people online who have some questions for the panel. So Archie YG4LY asks, but why is privatization even the solution if it feels more profit-driven than anything, if the money is making the decision, when the core of financing should be functioning, accessible public services?
That's a question to Ndi, I think, and Kwame should take those. And then, or should we go to Wangare? Wangare, please, do you want to take that?
No.
Yeah?
I
And
think
then we could go to Ndi.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I mean, there are really only two pots when you think about finance. You can think about public money, and if public money is difficult, you can think about private capital, private money, right? And I think that is what is being, we're stretching our abilities, or kind of thinking through how do we get more financing. I think now if the public is tough, now we're bringing in the private money. I also agree that while we're starting to turn our necks towards thinking about how do we access private financing and investor money to help us with our infrastructure glut, we must not leave the issue of our public money and the challenges that we're having there. We've talked about debt, but then we also need to talk about how do we make sure that we are rationalizing our expenditures. What we're spending every day, the government is spending every day. Is it value for money? Is it too expensive? Is it for white elephant projects that are in the budget? The revenues that we're collecting, how are we able to get more revenues? And I think those are things that we've been grappling with. It has taken us a long time. This is kind of my bread and butter, what I do every day, and is really close to my heart. But it's important that we continue to address those issues while we're also looking to this other side. So it's not about, why are we, one is worse than the other. I think both have to work in tandem. And sequencing, I think that's something that Kwame has brought up, but I think it's definitely, for me, from where I sit, it's a viable option because our debt situation, we don't want any more debt. Diana, we talk about this every day. No more debt, stop the debt crisis. We need more revenues to finance our own investment than sending the money out to pay for debt.
All right. Dr.
I think I'm going to have to teach some public finance. Our debt distress was caused by infrastructure. The biggest fiscal pressure on the budget comes from infrastructure finance. So, let me repeat. If we don't take some infrastructure off budget, you will never get out of a debt distress. For 10 years, and Kwame was with me, I warned against the thing I called mega infrastructure madness. How did it come about? Africa has a shortage of infrastructure capital. So a decade ago, three things happened simultaneously. The global financial crisis, quantitative easing, cheap money from the markets, Eurobonds. China Road, Belt and Road. Another, bearing gifts. Then, not to be left behind, the multinational or DFIs came up with a thing they called Africa infrastructure deficit. And they said we have an infrastructure deficit of 100 billion or some huge number. So three sources opened up their passes. Because African countries saw these as an opportunity that will close, we went out and borrowed recklessly on infrastructure. That is the only reason we have a debt crisis. So, to separate infrastructure from debt is to make a huge mistake. If we don't, I started thinking about how we're going to take infrastructure off budget 10 years ago. And that is why it is a very small line in our manifesto, which is exactly what we have done. That we will set up an infrastructure fund, stroke bank, capitalize it with privatization proceeds so that we can take infrastructure commercially bankable infrastructure projects. I was providing the citizens and politicians with a solution so that they do not keep us digging into a debt hole. Give me a second. You're very impatient.
We're running out of time,
This thing is my
We're running out of time,
project.
unfortunately.
You're challenging
We have
it
a lot to
yourself
get into.
without facts. So the coincidence is because we could not do this 3 years ago because people went to court and stopped privatization. Otherwise, our goal of doing this, we would have done it in 2023. But I think if you're going to have a takeaway, something is to connect infrastructure finance and debt. If you lose that connection, then this whole thing will not make sense to you.
Dr. Ndi, how about this for a fact? That 608 billion is lost to corruption every year. I didn't come up with that figure. ESCC came up with that.
Look,
so
my friend, let's not theorize.
I'm really talking about many Kenyans here, and many people in this room will tell you that corruption is something you should deal with first before creating another fund that could be another pot that corruption steals from every year. Is that a valid assessment, you think?
You have a political position, and I will not debate it. Because you have not.
It is a factual, it's a factual, because this is ESCC figures.
You are probably working on corruption when you are a child. So, give us some respect. Don't make up things.
Yeah.
We have done more
I didn't make this up.
to popularize, to deal with the issue advocacy around corruption than you can probably do for the rest of your life. Corruption is a problem. There is a problem everywhere. But it is a red herring.
Could you speak to the mic? You're speaking far from the mic.
It is a red herring when people lose arguments on other issues and they say, if we fix corruption, those problems will go away. So we are discussing infrastructure finance, how the national infrastructure finance
I'm sorry, I have
can
to.
help us. I think it's working. How the National Infrastructure Fund can help us to deal with the pressure of infrastructure finance on the budget. Okay? It is very specific. Is it an instrument that can take out some infrastructure project pressure of budget, yes or no? If you take that pressure, what is that pressure competing with? It is undermining social investment in education, in health, in non-commercial things which are very important.
Right.
Okay, so because you are borrowing World Bank IDA money and building power stations with it, it's wrong.
Right.
Because you're going to pay for power and then you don't finance the education. Is it susceptible to governance issues? All whatever are susceptible. But what is the safeguard? The safeguard is that, as Kwame said, people who are putting money in a commercial project are putting it for return. They will be very foolish to steal their own money. They will be very foolish to overprice the project. So, as long as the government is co-investing with other people who want to safeguard the returns that they can get from the project, then this is probably more insulated from our governance challenges than the money in the budget.
Right.
Otherwise, if you are saying that investors will invest with us, they own 90% of the money, then they allow us to inflate the project cost, I think that doesn't make sense at all.
Kwame? Before Kwame, all right.
And so that they answer. By the way, I accepted to be a panelist to be schooled. Two things. One, I like where Dr. Ndi you have ended, that the proposal is that the investors will run the investment to avoid the inflation, okay? But I have been your student for long. And especially you schooled us extremely well on two concepts. State capture, highway robbery. Very, very well. And the place of that level of heist within infrastructure projects. And the fact that those are the ones that ail us significantly. So first is to acknowledge that our governance system and our political culture is it has a high appetite for corruption. Okay? we may say that part of the reason why we are in the debt hole we are in is infrastructure projects over a certain period of time. But an audit of those infrastructure projects, a number of them, some dams have been refinanced 3 times, comfortably. Like we borrow the first time, we are given the money, we don't do anything, we don't do anything for the country, we do something for our pockets. Second, third time, okay? That's very well documented. So now, if the National Infrastructure Fund is to ensure that people watch over their money because government has no capacity, has no very good capacity to watch over their money, then that would be a valid thing, and maybe Kenyans, we may now want to get more involved. You get? Yeah. But I still want to know, hizi returns zinatoka wapi? Tutalipwa aje mimi nikiweka pension yangu kwa hii fund?
Kwame, you want to answer that?
Okay.
It's on you.
It is, okay. So first, remember, as has been explained, it's a fund. So government has its own money, which crowds in other money, and on the basis of that, there's investments into chosen projects. So we see here that there's a safeguard, which is if government comes up with another white elephant, say SGR, and then says the entire thing is 5 billion, but you can only put in 25% as a maximum, so that means it'll be placing in, how much, 1.25 of the 5, right? And nobody else does, then that project doesn't fly, or at least it doesn't fly at that cost. Now that's what David has explained to us, and that's a good thing. I mean, I think we have to concede that. What still worries me about the National Infrastructure Fund thing is, so for instance, and maybe this is just quibbling with, I wonder about the transition. Because the National Infrastructure Fund came in here when there are already big obligations that are already baked into our public spending into the future. So that's a first. The second is, if you look at the way the law is, it's laid, it's not too long. So if you have an afternoon, you can look through it and you can read it plainly, not even as a lawyer, and you'll get the gist of it. One of the things that worries me and why I think the political pressure we must not underestimate is because you hear, and I wasn't going to mention this, but I need to, the president mentioning the National Infrastructure Fund and sometimes suggesting that certain core projects that he likes will be. The problem with that is that the law doesn't allow him, as it exists, to do that. Because those plans should actually come through an investment policy which will be done. That investment policy done by council, it's sent down to the board, basically, which has a CEO and all those board members, who will then on an annual basis develop a work plan of sorts. That investment policy itself is actually also subject to parliamentary approval. So Parliament would have to approve. So guys, this has given us work. As I told you, we lost, in our view, and David, I see your point, but for me, I think of 300 billion shillings, if you could actually extinguish debt of 300 billion shillings, it would be equivalent to, I estimate, about reducing the debt, the borrowing this year alone, by close to 30 or 40%. Because I think government is borrowing about $1 trillion or thereabouts, in my view. So it is not immaterial, and especially if you think about the fact that you are extinguishing that debt and therefore the net present value is actually higher because you're reducing it at 7% per annum. Over 7 years, you'll have done a lot. So yes, it's a competition about one against the other. So there's stuff around that area. So yes, the political capture could actually still not just happen at the fund itself, but out there. And the final one that I have here, and you know Kenyans are concerned about, you see, this fund has created its own sanctions for penal sanctions for if somebody does some mischief. Now, these guys are dealing with billions of dollars. But the fine is 5 billion or 2 years, 5 million or, is it 5 years in jail or some amount of, 5 years, yes, in jail, which I thought does not match the responsibility, the size of the responsibility with the sanctions that are there. So that requires, I think, some work and for us to watch out. And the final one is this. You all know, we had the housing fund, levy fund, and all these other things. And whenever they are sold to us, we are told, guys, we've covered all the stops. including the petroleum fund. You all guys know what's happening now. That's what I worry about. But before long, there's such a pot of money in the fund itself. Before you know it, that's one thing that will be. And I think I also am not persuaded completely that just because you have a fund in the infrastructure fund, as I read it here, National Infrastructure Fund, means the government is actually entirely free of any liabilities that might come. Because the cabinet secretaries sign certain letters of credit and some stuff, right? Those are liabilities. I don't know whether they'll bear. I don't know whether it means. Precisely? Yes, of course, of course. Because, I mean, they have. So what I'm not too sure is, especially now that it's a state corporation, if it is a state corporation and remains as such, its liabilities, should something go wrong, will rest on the shoulders of taxpayers.
Which is what national debt is, essentially.
Let me explain that. The guarantees or the letters of support that the cabinet secretary is committed to give are not those to do with anything new to the fund. They are those that would be ordinarily given to investments of that type. So that if it's a power project, all power projects get letters of support in terms of policy and offtake of power by KPLC. So it is simply restating that part of the government's responsibility is if you have a power project, that the government will keep its end of the bargain. There is no additional comfort or safeguard to the fund. 2, all the fund's financing is project finance. Project finance is non-recourse. There is a very specific provision that the fund will not incur debt on its own balance sheet. Okay? Mm-hmm. So that means if you put in $50 million in a project among other people, and it goes bad, all of you lose. The other people had put in, you put in 50, they put in 250, project goes bad, all of you lose that amount of money, but only on that project. That project was financed purely on the investors taking a view on the cash flows from that project, other than the balance sheet of the item. As I said, the public fund sits with the government. It sits in CBK. The only monies that are drawn are those where an investment committee has approved a project. So there is no debt being incurred by government. There is debt being incurred by the investment. So the typical infrastructure investments will be 30% equity, 70% debt. Yeah. So if a project is $1 billion, it will require $300 million of equity. NIF will probably put 25% of that, which is $60 million. Mm-hmm. Then the project will go and look for $700 million of debt from DFIs and pension funds and other people. Mm. If that project fails, it fails on its own merit. There is no obligation on the government to pay anybody. People lose their shot. The sovereign debt is not project tied. Right. Whether your project dies, succeeds or fails, you pay. Right. Here, investors are taking risk on the success of the project. That's why they look at the project very carefully. Okay. So because when they put skin in the game and the project fails, they will not have recourse to the treasury. They will have lost their investment. Right. I think that's something I think that there isn't enough clarity on.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
In 30 seconds, please.
I did have the same concern because the national government has to guarantee, these arrangements. But I think in this conversation, I still get worried because we talk about profits and investors and all of this, but I worry about Wanjiko. I worry that investors are going to push for profits. This fund is going to have to make profits and returns for people who are investing. But does that mean that the infrastructure that is built might be out of reach for the majority of Kenyans that we have, depending on the project that we're investing in? So I think it's important. Yeah. Does
KenGen posting a profit bother you? KenGen posts a profit.
Kwame has an answer on this side.
Isn't it?
Before we get to
Kenya
you
Power
again,
posts a
Wangari.
profit.
Yeah.
True?
Yeah.
What's the profit? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. So
Those are the projects that the fund will be investing in.
Dr. Ndi, let Wangari speak and then Kwame.
okay. So
Kwame?
Wangari, I think, and I've heard it, and I think the public here is, look, the National Infrastructure Fund does not take away our responsibility and that of members of parliament to ensure that the government builds the staff that provides the services that you and I need. So for instance, if you decide, and perhaps instead of the, let me plug in, instead of the housing thing, we should have actually had a schools fund to build schools. I mean, as you know now, schools have triple deckers and something bigger than that. Because the demand for school places, especially in secondary schools, is definitely much higher than what the supply is. And you can see it leaking, even as we are letting people go into houses, and 4,000 people and 200,000 kids are eating in the fields. But my debater's point aside, if any of us feels that the National Infrastructure Fund will provide an incentive and for people to only fund infrastructure projects that have a commercial return, that's okay. But it does not absolve government or the Treasury and Parliament on the one side from saying, fine, let the National Infrastructure Fund do this. If you guys think, and I don't think cattle dips are it, but I'm just using this for a simple example, if you think that cattle dips are required and the National Infrastructure Fund will not fund it, then you do that through appropriations. And that's the members of parliament's role. That's it. So it means that for those of us who are concerned with the services that poorer people or people like us consume, our job is not done because a National Infrastructure Fund exists.
Right.
It's actually become more complex.
All right. Wangari, and we need to wrap up. We're running out of time, unfortunately.
No, I agree. But then it also depends. I mean, this fund is going to be there for a long time. So it's not only the projects that we're seeing now. You know, the assets that we have are limited, right? We don't have like a glut of infrastructure projects. So going forward, which assets are going to be put forward? What is going to be, which shares are going to be sold? Which parts of which companies are going to be sold? And I think it depends on the type of, of the capitalization of what kind of projects, what kind of assets are we putting in, and how closely do they touch on wananchi. I think it's important, yes, the National Assembly, we still have a role, but at the end of the day, we're bringing in a new player. We're bringing in local and foreign investors. Foreign investors don't really have a skin in the game in terms of making sure that I get my power, in terms of I get those services. So I think it goes back to governance, it goes back to regulation, and making sure, yes, we want profits, but at the same time, we need social good.
All right. Now, Dr.
Sure.
Unfortunately,
I think there's a bit of education which is required.
We're running out of time.
We finance our water and sewerage projects using bilateral DFIs. The biggest lenders are the French DFI, AFD, and all those people. They lend the Nairobi Water, all those companies, on budget, with a sovereign guarantee. Those are commercial things because we pay for the water. What we are saying is, we're going to ask the AFDs of this world, we are not going to borrow from you on budget. We are going to structure investment into those companies, and you can co-invest with us on a project finance basis.
All right.
So nothing changes. We just push these DFIs from giving us tied aid.
You've made that point. You've made the point.
Disguised as gifts. And tell them, if you are investing in these are commercial, we take them off budget together.
You made that point. Now we'd like to turn to the audience here at the Macmillan Memorial Library. Justine?
So we do have a few questions. I think your hand was up first, and then we'll just go around the room.
Thank you all for a wonderful panel. My name is Adero, and when I think about this issue of political exposure, one of the ways that we can perhaps mitigate that, in my mind, is through the pipeline. So my question is for you, David. What's the strategy in terms of how that pipeline of projects is created? Is it something that's co-developed with private sector and even perhaps some public participation? And then overall, what's the strategy of which projects become shortlisted? Because I think if we can have sort of some more public participation in how the list of projects is created, then we can mitigate a bit of that political exposure risk. And then just zooming out from that, I think just for the entire panel, I would ask, you know, what are the risks that you see that would cause this National Infrastructure Fund to fail? And what are some ideas you have on how to mitigate those risks?
Quick answer. As of now, we are scrubbing the budget to remove commercially bankable things that we have been funding on budget. So there's a pipeline being generated from the infrastructure sectors. So we've asked energy, can you list all the things that you are funding or you have put in the budget to be funded by the World Bank, and you are raising money from KFW and all manner of other people. So we have that list. From roads, what are the highways that are potentially financeable? Water, when we came in, one of the first things we did when we came in was to structure a water purchase agreement, which borrows from the purchase agreement, so that we could scale up investment in irrigation. So we have a pipeline of irrigation projects that were already in the budget, but not financeable. So those projects are the first projects that will be submitted to the investment, to the advisory committee, because it's its job. If you look at them, it's made up of investment experts, work with people, prepare an investment policy and plan, and submit to cabinet. There is no guarantee that investors will offtake all of them. But because quite a lot of them, then you start asking, what de-risking do they want? Some, like irrigation projects, a lot of them have viability gaps. Can government fund the viability gap? But the first pipeline tries to deal with the fiscal pressure by taking those projects off budget and creating that fiscal space so that we can fund schools. Because the reason, I tell you, one power project can fund 5,000 schools. So if you take one power project out, you have the fiscal space to fund your schools.
Okay. I think the question is about what risks do I see. Okay, so the point for me is that, again, a credibility question for government. So we are trying to ease fiscal pressure. Unless government reduces the deficit, I don't know that I mean, because what happens is you are opening up an option to create space in the main budget for government to prevent future, to ease the distress. But what happens if they simply get on the one side, ease the pressure, and go on borrowing anyway? In that case, of course, I don't know whether we'd have solved the problem, because you just give public sector professionals who are very good at creating projects an opportunity to develop something that's new. That's the first. The second one that I'm thinking about here is this. Think about it as the people who finance things in government, or who buy treasury bonds, or who finance things in government. Unless it's your DFIs and people who have actually that profile that David spoke about, your average bank or person who lends to government is lending at 14%. Well, it's a little lower now, 12%, 10 even, right? Why would they take a risk on your infrastructure project if they can sell you the debt at 10%? So unless government behavior changes in such a way in terms of its appetite for borrowing, we would simply have provided two tracks to continue to raise that. So I'm not too sure that we should insist that it solves that, but because it's solving the debt, the fiscal distress that Kenya is in right now, unless we discipline public spending on the other side, it is just possible that we have created a gap for people who are in the public sector to actually generate more projects that they think, look, this is not fundable commercially, but let's buy it anyway. And that will not necessarily reduce the spending.
Another question? There's a question at the front.
Yeah. My name is Eric Mukai. I wanted to ask a question to Ndii, because he has pitched to us the best case scenario in terms of the National Infrastructure Fund. So I want you to also maybe look out 10 years out and pitch what's the worst case scenario that can happen in terms of the infrastructure fund, first of all. And then secondly, you talked about, let's say, taking some of the dividends from Safaricom, the government securitized that to get a bit of money to invest in the, at an IRR, which Vodacom showed of around 18%. So if you're going to invest that in the infrastructure fund, so what you're giving up in terms of opportunity cost is around 18%. So then can you then guarantee that in this project that you're going to invest in, 18% is kind of a guaranteed return, and below that is actually almost, you're losing money in terms of that. And then finally, in terms of, you talked about the investors themselves losing a bit of the cash if they invest the debt. So then if the government is also putting in around 25% some of these projects, so is that also implicit that the 25% will be lost in certain projects? And then if it is there a backstop that will also be, if the projects failed, will that also necessitate the central government again putting in a bit of funds to that? And then finally, also, what are guarantees that you have that the fund that you have will not go the way of one MDB and more of in the way of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund?
It's on.
The National Infrastructure Fund is not a sovereign wealth fund. It's a development finance institution. So if you want to compare it, you compare it with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, you compare it with the Nigerian Infrastructure Fund, Ghana has one. These are not sovereign wealth funds. They are DFIs. Okay, so they are the same as TDB or AFC or those kind of institutions, just a national one. The infrastructure finance, infrastructure project finance actually attracts lower finance cost than sovereign debt. So, if you look at the securitized road bond, the time we were doing that, government was borrowing at 12% on 10-year money. We got that money at 7.5%. Why? Because it is secured. Simple reason. So, government money is unsecured. You can take a haircut on sovereign debt at very short notice. But infrastructure project where you have taken a view on the revenues, let's take an airport. And you know, unless you take a view, what are the revenue streams of an airport? Passenger service fee, landing fee of aircraft, rental space for commercial purposes. If you can ring-fence some of that revenue, you will be able to borrow now at 6 or 7%, at rates that the government is not able to borrow. Because you can see your cash. But treasury, you don't know tomorrow. The National Infrastructure Fund is not about a return on investment, as sovereign wealth funds are. But what is happening in the world today, most of the money available for infrastructure finance is not available for government. Those people don't want to sovereign debt. We have a framework agreement with some sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East of $10 billion for infrastructure project finance. They will not buy Eurobonds. They want infrastructure investments. A lot of the other money we are seeing is private wealth. A lot of family offices have $20, $30 billion, and they're telling you, we're interested in energy, ports. So there's a lot of capital which is not available for government to borrow because those people don't want to be taken to the Paris Club. And they also want to see what they're investing in.
All right.
Yeah? So that is what we are aligning to be able to tap in. Right now we are totally dependent on money which comes with conditions, donor money which comes with tied commercial things. And one of the reasons why these people are pushing back is because they lose the opportunity for giving us tied aid, which is tied to companies from their countries. Once you have your own money, you can go to the market and get better value.
All right. Another question? I think we should get a question from, there's a lady somewhere, you think? Okay. Just Evans, please. Evans Ogada has been a panelist on the last one as well.
Thank you. Good evening, Tom. Good evening, panelists. Quick comments. David Ndi, the problem with your government is, number one, you talk at us, you don't engage us. There's something called Habermasian democracy. You speak to citizens, you engage us, we get to understand what you're doing. Very good ideas, but you're talking at us. You need to speak with us. Number two, the why now question posed by Kwame and my good friend Diana Gishengo. I am yet to understand how we are going to reconcile the existing debt distress vis-a-vis this vehicle created by the National Infrastructure Fund. And it's an equity question in the Constitution in the Article 201. How do we ensure that this fund will be disciplined enough to take off and yet also give us room to ease off the debt? That question has not been answered. Now, to my two quick structural questions as a constitutional lawyer and teacher, one on accountability and structuring. I hear we are being schooled. Let me be schooled on this. How have we designed oversight and public reporting mechanisms under this act to ensure that the resources are effectively used and to prevent misuse that has been prevalent in this country, and also to guarantee public oversight and public participation? That is on accountability. On the structuring, what has been put in place to ensure that we adopt a balance between independent investor confidence and alignment with national development priorities so that we avoid duplications that exist with a number of existing financial institutions? So, for example, what will this fund bring in that the EADB or the African Development Bank could not offer us? Thank you.
Lee, please. Yeah, please, yeah.
Read the act. The fund will report to cabinet, the minister, I think 4 times a year, and to parliament twice a year. The investment policy will be approved by cabinet. The reason why we have a governing council and a board, we wanted to insulate the board from government. So we put a bunch of very eminent people to do the policy and a bit of oversight, so that and protect the board, so that the board can make operational decisions. So that is the logic behind having a governing council, advisory council, and the board. So it is actually trying to, it doesn't make not perfect, but that's the principle of trying to insulate the board and management from whatever. That was the first part. On the question of, what is the next part?
You say that you're talking at Kenyans instead of talking with Kenyans.
I think it depends on which Kenyans. Most of the people in this room are against this administration. So we really don't waste our time.
They're Kenyans.
No.
Regardless.
This is a democracy. You do have people who support the opposition, people who support the administration. So you cannot spend your time trying to persuade everyone. So there are those people who spend quite a bit of time.
David Ndi, you are a presidential advisor. It's your job to talk people into agreeing with you.
There are people who, there is a very huge trust deficit.
You should address that, don't you think you should?
It has its reasons, and they are valid. I don't consider it my job to close it.
It actually is. In this case, it is, David.
My job is to advise the president on how to deliver on our manifesto. The engagement with Kenyans will happen in the course of electoral and conversation. But while I am doing my work, I really have no time to come and try and persuade people. I think institutions like Kwame's which we established. We established for the purpose of providing a platform
that is clear,
for
Doctor.
unpacking what government is doing for the people.
Yeah,
I don't have to do it myself.
Let's have Diana speak, please. And then we can go back to Justine for question and answers.
I don't know. The questions would be, are there mechanisms for people oversight, participation, and transparency in the Act? There are mechanisms for the board and the fund to interact with cabinet and parliament annually. The only opening I see for people is when it goes back to parliament. However, I want to note that when you think about most of the legislation that touch on PFM, this is the one where it does not bring back the Article 10 and 201 principles, where then participation of the people will be critical. The discussion we've had here and the education, if you think about it, if people are investing their money, and it is based on the design of the investment that they must get it back. They no longer have the safeguard that this is sovereign debt, so it will be paid, regardless of whether the project, regardless of whether the project becomes viable, is making returns. I think this is one of the things that Kenyans need to understand. How I see it, for instance, if it is road infrastructure, this will only invest in a road that is likely to bring enough returns around tolls. Okay? And the tolls must be good enough so that these investors don't lose their money and they don't wait for too long. Airports, water, and so on. What will happen to the cost of the water? That discussion, there is no mechanism in the Act. Right. Okay? I would say we wait for the first one to roll out. I'm sure Ogada will lead us in enforcing the accountability and transparency.
Sorry, Diana, we're running out of time. Justine?
So we do have some couple of questions. We're going to go to the back of the room for a little bit, and then we'll come back to the front of the room. Sijawasahau, I promise. I'm just trying to give priority also to the people who have been shadow banned.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mwinde, and I have two questions. So the first one is, the fund aims that for every 1 public shilling, there's 10 shillings from the private sector. And we obviously know that the private sector is focused on profits more than the benefit of the people. So what provisions are there that the projects that are going to come off this private money are for the people and not going to harm the people? And then my second question is, if this NIF fails, because you've sold it to us and it looks like it's going to work. So what if it accidentally fails? What happens to the people? Will we shoulder the burden of bad debt, or what's going to happen? Yeah, thank you.
Who's the question to?
Ndi, thank you.
All right. Please, when you ask your question, please direct it at one of the panelists.
Quick answer. If the project is invested in is a public service, the tariffs for that public service are determined by the government. No investor will put in money for a project where customers will not be able to afford to buy. So before they determine that they're going to put in this money.
Before you continue, I'm sorry, but our audience member is saying that that's not the question she asked.
No, she asked, how do you make sure? So if
it fails, yes.
Now, the first question is, how do you make sure that how do you balance profit with affordability of the services by the people? And the balance is, if it's a public service, the tariff is regulated anyway. So if it's power, the tariffs are regulated. The investors only invest if the regulated tariff, they can make a profit under that tariff. If they cannot, they will not invest. So the power of government to set prices for public services is not being taken away. investors are asking, is that price adequate for me to make a profit? If the fund fails completely, it means, for example, if the fund has 300 billion shillings, and because it is unlikely to invest more than 30 billion shillings in one project, it means that all the infrastructure projects it will invest will fail. Infrastructure projects hardly ever fail because most of them are utilities. Even in the stock market, they are your safest stocks. There is no IPP or power project in Kenya which has failed. It is very unlikely that water utilities will fail. Irrigation projects, by the time an investor is putting money, the only irrigation projects that it's likely to invest in are commercial irrigation projects, where you have calculated that the acreage available and its water offtake is sufficient to fund the waterworks. So that is the job of the investment committees, who will include the DFI somebody mentioned, because if you look at who the investors are likely to be, they are the TDBs, they are the IFCs of this world. All those are typically the investors in these funds. Then they form an investment committee which will approve projects based on the criteria that they use today to finance projects on budget. So that doesn't change.
We also do have another question at the back here, and then I'll come back to the front. Please kindly make your questions brief, so we have only about 8 to 10 minutes left.
Good evening, everyone. Madam Economist, my question is to Dr. Ndi. The question is, now that the NIF will be focused on the commercial project, does it mean the government will not be involving the DFIs, this being a Kenyan DFI kind of, or it will be a partnership onwards?
Thank you. The answer is the following. For commercial projects, we will want to co-invest with them outside the budget. Then on budget, we want them to make their money available on budget for social investment, so that we want to stop the World Bank funding electricity on budget, so that the World Bank funds health and education and rural access roads and other things which have got a high public and social return but a low commercial return. So it is allocating your sources of funding and aligning them with where they serve you best. And those institutions are very happy to do that. They can see the logic, because they say, these ones we can invest, this portfolio will be on this side, this portfolio will be on this side.
My question is for Dr. Devin D. And my lord, do you prefer local banks to fund the debt part of the private entity in order to avoid forex issues?
It depends on the revenue streams. If the revenue streams are foreign currency, then you're probably going to get cheaper foreign currency funding. If the revenue streams are shilling revenue streams, then you look for more shilling debt. Those are the decisions that are made within the structuring of a project finance.
Thank you. My name is Joe Abala. I'm here on behalf of Arts for Impact Initiative. I have a question and a comment. My question goes to all the panelists, and my question comes from a statement that Dr. Ndi said in his submission. The NIF is to ease the fiscal distress on the national budget and the debt that has crippled other sectors like education, health, and so on. So is this a guarantee that if NIF starts working and all that, we'll see an improvement in the education, health sector? And now on the comment, and it goes back to Mr. Ogada's question on accountability. From how I felt, the question was not whether we have laws or policies on accountability for NIF. It was on the implementation part of the accountability. Because recently we've had this oil crisis, but where does accountability stop? Because the CS Energy is still in office. So the question on accountability is not whether we have laws or policies on accountability, it's on the implementation part of accountability. Thank you.
Kwame, do you want to take that? And then we can hear from Wangare.
Okay.
It's on, I believe.
Well, I think this is, so that's why I say that the logic that, of this, I mean, of the argument as David has given it, the argument that David has given us is basically we're trying to ease fiscal pressure for government to spend in infrastructure because the demand is there. And so for that reason, if we have a fund where the risks are borne by the people who are funding, then obviously that eases. The opportunity cost of that is basically, I mean, the argument is that the trade-off government makes is that then we have money and the same money will not be used for repaying debt, we'll be using it for social investments and schools and all that. Now, that's as it is. But who makes sure that government will dedicate that space that has been created to ensuring that you're not creating other projects separate from the social projects that we prefer? I think that's the work of Parliament and us. So there's no guarantee, in my view, that it's going to work that neatly unless there's pressure from the rest of us, and especially Parliament takes cognizance of the fact that, okay, the reason we approved this bill is so that we can ease that pressure, and the fiscal consequence has to be there has to be new spending on the social sectors. So that means there's still work to do. So this is not an algorithm that does your stuff for you for free. It just makes sure that, yes, you've created a space. It's upon us now to tell government, well, this has eased this amount of pressure for you on infrastructure, or when our cabinet secretary comes and says, look, I have to pay Eurobond bills, and for that reason, I am not going to invest in schools, but I'd like to invest in schools, because they say that. Then you simply say that to make sure that in 2 years you're not coming back to tell us that you'll be funding this, can you take this project and make sure that the National Infrastructure Fund takes it, and please use these for that. So there's still work to be done about how project choices will be made, right? That's the logic that I see. And we must not take it for granted, because there are also very clever people in the bureaucracy. They'll come up with other projects that are equally. So yes, there's still work, political work, and public participation on our part to make sure that we push the wheel in the direction that we wish. Thanks. Yeah.
This also goes back to what I had mentioned earlier in terms of the projects that are already on budget. We continue paying debt on those. A lot of them, are forming a lot of our debt, as said by Dr. Ndi. So we'll continue paying debt services on those projects unless maybe there's a plan to restructure those projects and bundle them into the NIF. We still have an obligation. So the NIF will be dealing with projects that are going forward, but the projects that are already on our budget books, we continue to pay, and we'll continue to figure out how to service our debt based on those investments.
Let me help you there. Actually, one of the conversations we are having with the DFIs, the World Banks, is repurposing money that they have ongoing projects for infrastructure, where the components have not started. And we took those components off budget, and we repurposed that money, even within the infrastructure space, so that if we take money out of a transmission line, or the Kenyan base, which is in the project but hasn't started, within electricity, you can repurpose that money for rural electrification, which is non-commercial. So it doesn't even have to move across sectors. It can move within the sector from the commercial to the non-commercially bankable component. Right. You can take out, Nairobi has not developed sewer for 30 years. So one of the things we are building a huge trunk sewer. 70% of the water bill you actually pay is supposed to be for sewer. Nairobi Water and Sewerage Company, but it doesn't provide the sewerage. So one of the things that we are looking at how to do is to restore that system so that we monetize the sewer that we are building, and then the money for government goes to smaller sanitation things that help communities.
Right.
So even within that restructuring, there are lots of things we are seeing you can restructure already, and you repurpose the money within existing projects to fund more socially impactful things. And that is a conversation that those people are very happy to have.
Just to piggyback off of the conversation that's going on, Jonathan Namu has sent in a question, just to push back on the conversation that's being had, especially regarding service versus profit, which boils down to trust. Investors might see the profit motive, but there's trust issues underpinning the questions that will likely prevent the rolling out of the National Infrastructure Fund. Government is not trusted, as has been pointed out by Dr. Ndi. And yet the audience government is addressing, what the audience government is addressing is the investor audience. Are Kenyans secondary to this conversation? Because it feels like Wangari has brought this up and it's just, it's like it's being skipped over just so we can weave in how much it's important that the fund will work. So are Kenyans secondary to this conversation? And I think this has to go to all the panelists because the person who sent the question is not with us, so I would like all of you to have a quick quip on it, and then we have 2 questions from the audience, and then we wrap up this segment. Thanks.
Yep, response from...
The National Infrastructure Fund is mooted in our manifesto. In fact, it is on the part on fiscal framework and how we can balance fiscal consolidation with also infrastructure finance. And it says we will move commercial infrastructure out of the budget and dedicate concessional money to projects that have more social impact than commercial. So to say that people are secondary, when we are saying that we need to take commercial things out so that we use the more public money for more socially impactful projects. And we got voted in, perhaps by some people who hadn't read. But if there is a trust deficit, which I agree, but we are here now debating that we have done exactly what we said we would. And we are having to defend it because people are saying we don't trust you. We don't trust that you are going to do this as you have said. Then the basis for that trust deficit is not something that we can close. Because the way democracy works is that you put a platform, if you get elected on it, you put your nose on the grind, you try and deliver. After 5 years, you tell people, you elected on this, and whether we have done it or not, you have a chance to decide.
All right, Diana, your reaction to the question?
Fellow Kenyans, taxpayers, this is about money. Are Kenyans seen to be people who can fund this type of money? Do you have money to fund the airport? You don't, and we are in debt, and we must move forward. And the existing mechanisms are very problematic. You people stop everything through public participation, okay? We will do everything to make sure that you pay for water infrastructure in your water bills. No investor is going to go at a profit. We are going to become like an and even equity is becoming an investment bank. So that right there is the answer. Are there risks to it? Yes, there are risks to it, and that is why we are being challenged. But where it is right now, by the way, after today, I don't even foresee government ever speaking to us citizens. No, they'll just come and tell us, water bill, you know the way they did to Asha and set rates. And we complied, we Kenyans. Bankable. Bankable means people must get their money back. And why I honestly feel, whereas the controller of budget, the auditor general is there are certain aspects that are not the usual PFM, okay? And if people are to invest, project financing, noise must be cancelled. Noise must be cancelled by all means, and this is about noise cancellation. We will deliver.
2 more questions from the audience.
My name is Alexander Reithi. Let me probably start from where Diana has stopped. From what I have been hearing is money will make the decisions, and one of the driving factors of the National Infrastructure Fund and the investments that will come in there is the fact that government has the power to control tariffs. Therefore, what this means is government will prioritize profit maximization against national interest as provided for in Article 203 of the Constitution. My worry here is this will end up increasing the cost of living instead of reducing it, because we must ensure that the investors get back their money. But my greatest worry here is this NIF sort of is opening a different debt book. And what will happen to contingent liability in the event that a particular project ends up making losses? Or will we just revert back to the government power of increasing tariffs and then impoverishing us even more?
Who's the question to?
There is no contingent liability. The project finance people can tell you what non-recourse vehicles are. They mean exactly that. The investors are investing on the project, having assessed the project lift and considered it acceptable, and said that they do not expect anybody else to cover them if the project does not succeed. So most of what whatever we'll be doing, and investors do that because they like exposure to risk, because the risk return metrics as that if there's no exposure to risk, there's no return. On questions of tariffs and cost, all tariff review processes in Kenya are subject to huge public participation processes. The National Infrastructure Fund investments will not be exempt. So let me repeat, people will invest in, today, we have all our power generation is commercial, because even KenGen is commercial. The tariffs in power are determined based on whether they provide adequate return for investors. We are not doing anything new. What we are saying is still, even though generation is commercial, transmission is largely funded on budget. KPLC has a lot of loans that are government guaranteed. One of the lessons I have learned about this in the last few years I've been in government is the people in government don't like investment. The people in government prefer debt. Why do they prefer debt? Because when we borrow, they procure. When they procure, the contractors come and see them because they are the ones who control the money. If that project is an investment project, investors will make sure that it is done at the least possible cost so that they can recoup their investment. So there is an inbuilt bias for debt within government.
To add on what you were saying, does this mean that the NIF will remedy this completely? Just before we go into the last question, does the removal of debt in it just mean that NIF will, because there's a clause there that says some of the projects that will be undertaken will be debt-based. So I am wondering, like, is that removed completely for people who continue investing in debt or like to take up debt for projects? Before we take our last question. Just make a point.
The debt is in the project. It is not on the balance sheet of the fund. So if we finance the airport, it will be equity plus debt. But that debt will be limited to be paid by the revenues coming out of the airport. If that revenue is not adequate, those investors have no other recourse. So projects always have debt. The problem is now, government borrows and puts the debt in projects as public money. And those people don't have to repay. Many of these entities don't repay.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I'm being told that we've run out of time. I cannot, unfortunately. I have to give you all one last round to wrap it up. But it would be remiss of me, Dr. David, if I don't ask you about this. It's really hard for the people in this room to listen to you and think that you have their best interest at heart. And here's why. You tweeted this, the Gen Z grievance is not a continuation of the struggle. They are status quo children traumatized by sudden loss of privilege and public largesse they enjoyed under Kenyatta. That's why they were so easily weaponized by the counter-reformist forces. Normal service has resumed.
I have my politics. You have your politics. We are on opposite sides of the table, and we will meet at the ballot. And so I do not actually expect these people here.
Kenyans?
No, they are not the only Kenyans. They are just a small section.
There's more Kenyans, but
they are more. I'd like. So I will not prosecute my politics at this forum.
I'll let you prosecute yourself.
I will not prosecute my politics at this forum. By the way, I don't consider you people my constituency.
In 2017, you said, we have been calling for mass action since 1991. We will not stop as long as people try to install dictatorship. That's what they believe, and that's why many Kenyans went to the streets.
Look, my friend, if you want us to have a political conversation, let's have a political conversation.
It's a human rights conversation. It's not a political conversation.
I don't want you to trust me.
I'm not asking you to trust you. I'm asking you a question.
I don't want you to align with my politics. I am not here to answer questions about my politics. I have no apologies to make about my politics.
All right. Well, then I think it wouldn't be unfair if most of these people come out of here feeling unconvinced, and you will. All right. All right. Kwame, you have something to add?
As we wrap up, yes, I'd much prefer, of course, there's a place for politics, and perhaps as a country we should one time find an opportunity to discuss it all. But here we are discussing the National Infrastructure Fund Act, which is an act. Guys, find it, read it. One of the things that concerns me as I close about it is the Infrastructure Fund states that privatization proceeds will be used to fund it. And it suggests to me that that will be a perpetuity. My view is that privatization funds should find other needs, especially if it's successful. If government can leverage for every $1 an additional 10, and David suggests as much as 15, then we don't need to fill the infrastructure fund perpetually with this money. And I think that's an oversight that members of parliament looked at. So perhaps this act should have had like a sunset clause in which after say 15 years, review its performance, and on the basis of that, adjust whatever needs to be adjusted altogether. Thanks.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Diana, in 30 seconds, you're now.
I have nothing much to say. I understand this. I wish I was rich. The question that was asked about procurement. Then if somebody has their own private capital, and they have calculated and they know they can influence an investment and get richer, they will go that route than kickbacks of procurement, okay? So the people with capital are very likely to get richer. Would it create efficiency? By the way, run well, the National Infrastructure Fund would help to create certain infrastructure that we will struggle with because of our current debt crisis. Maybe it will even set the standards that we will use to measure accountability for debt-funded projects. But having said that, it will be painful. This one will be painful at first for Kenyans, but let's get ready to do what we can.
One point for Kwame. The ring fencing of the privatization proceeds was introduced by Parliament.
Yeah.
It wasn't by us. When we asked them why they introduced it, they said they wanted to do that in the short term so that the infrastructure fund can be fully funded because they can remove it.
All right.
So it is theirs, it is not ours.
All right.
The mindset I'm hearing here about the private sector investors is one of entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial behavior. I think it's misplaced. The biggest investors, infrastructure investments are low risk, reasonably low return investments, very long term. Entrepreneurs don't have that kind of appetite. The biggest investors in infrastructure are institutional investors, primarily pension funds, increasingly sovereign wealth funds. So these are funds which are typically very aligned with the public purpose.
All right, Dr.
Because
David,
many
we've run
of
out
them,
of time.
for example, the biggest investor in infrastructure in South Africa is the public pension fund of South Africa.
All right.
Same in Australia. So the concerns about entrepreneurial behavior is something you are not likely to find with the kind of capital that goes into infrastructure.
It's a good place to end it. Wangare?
One, governance arrangements must be impeccable, absolutely impeccable. I think, as I said, but the Council of Governors needs to be somewhere in that governing council because they're going to have to provide auxiliary services to a lot of these services. Number two, double counting. Let's relook at all the other funds that exist that are doing infrastructure investment and rationalize and figure out how to make it tight. And then I think lastly, we must learn capacity build. The people who are going to be negotiating against the table, across the table from some very, very experienced infrastructure, project specialists. We are very, very deficient, I think, when it comes to making those kind of negotiations and those arrangements. We need to learn, we need to capacity build, and we need to make sure that we're investing in projects that are for our greater public good.
Sante. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end of this conversation. You've been so patient, and for that, there's a cup of tea uko nyuma. You can have that cup of tea and some bites hapo. You're also invited, Dr. David. But thank you all for coming to this conversation. That was Wangare, Africa Fiscal Policy Economist, Kwame Owino, CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs, Diana from TISA, and Dr. David Ndi, Presidential Advisor. Asanteni sana for making time. You have a glorious night wherever you go.
Nataka nifremie hii.
Wait. You're good.
You stand here. You stand here. So,
something short.
Yeah, just something short about your expectations, what you expected about the town hall, and then your take now on the town hall.
Bro, lakini mimi na mic freight. Sijazia mic.
Utashika tu, hakuna shida. Hakuna shida.
Usman expectation, how was it?
How was it? And then if all your questions were answered.
It's okay, from the shoulder.
You can stop by this. Yes. I know this guy.
Eh? Yeah, ask.
Nijibu. Nijibu.
Mbona nimuulize?
Shukran. Nianze kuongea?
Okay. Stand over there.
Ulikuwa live by the way.
Okay.
Ulikuwa live.
Just move. Don't be worried about the light.
Doc, unafanya polling hii mwaka. Yeah. Take it. Are you hopeful?
What were the expectations about this house? And what's their take?
Umesikia? Yes. Utasimama ama linda kushow. Sawa.
Uko sawa? Bado.
Stand here. There. Then your body language will face the camera, but you answer on facing.
Utaniuliza si ndio?
Ndakuuliza.
Sawa.
Iko sawa. So what were your expectations and were they met today in this forum?
Yeah, my expectations were very high, but because of the quality of the panel that were invited and the quality of Africa Uncensored, yeah, and they were met. But it was very confrontational. That's part of democracy.
Was the discussion there and what did you learn? What is your key takeaway from today's discussion?
I think the idea of NIF is very brilliant.
Yes.
The idea of taking debt away from our public debt to like commercialize to commercial infrastructure, yes. I think is a very good idea.
Yes.
So I'm supportive of the idea. Like Dr. Devindi, the architecture of NHIF was able to convince me of the idea.
So what are you going to change moving forward? You are doing now that you have the idea. What is going to change now in your life, for example? You are going to invest in the companies that have been told?
Let's see. If I am able to raise money, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes.
coming to this session, I was hoping to understand the National Infrastructure Fund better in terms of how we are even going to track how it's going to be implemented. But my key question that I feel was left unanswered is on the part of how will we identify priorities? Will you go by, for example, what we have in our annual development plans or what has been identified before in the CIDPs? And how sure are we that it is not going to be politicized in terms of we go by what the politicians feel should be the priority and not what exactly we, the people, would love to be prioritized. Because even looking at the constitution of the committee that is in charge of this fund, it has around 3 politicians in it. So the conflict of interest, but also the monitoring, the key indicators for it, and what happens if it fails, and also the sustainability plan of it. Yeah, thanks.
I think you've captured the discussion very, very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, you can start by introducing yourself and tell us your expectations today. Were they met coming to this forum?
Hi, my name is Kelvin Kamau. I like to think of myself as a concerned citizen. Coming to this forum, I think my expectations were halfly met because I got to understand the political nuances around the National Infrastructure Fund. I also got to understand perspectives around the need the infrastructure programs, because I think Kenya as at present is a country where infrastructure really runs the bell. You can't really claim to be a government that's working if you don't have visible infrastructure projects. And so I wanted those who are critical of it to even give us alternative models that would meet that political demand for infrastructure projects, but also now incorporate their concerns around that. So I think that's what I felt was missing. It wasn't really addressed, but yeah.
So thank you very much. You've captured it very well. Thank you for your interview.
Okay, thank you. It was enjoyable. Yes. Have a nice evening.
Hi, you can start by introducing yourself and tell us if your expectations were met in today's convening.
Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Teddy Kenya.
Yes.
I am an active citizen.
Yes.
I can say my expectations were really met.
Yes.
I came here with an expectation of understanding more about the National Infrastructure Fund
Yes.
and how it will be leveraged as a tool of transitioning Kenya away from public debt
Yes.
into private sector-led investment. And I believe that the panel has done a good job. I now fully understand why, as a country, we have to implement this National Infrastructure Fund. I've also noticed from the audience that there's a lot of apprehension and lack of public trust in this new initiative by the government. However, I think that it is a wait-and-see moment, but I believe if everything is done as it's currently structured, we are likely to have accelerated infrastructure in this country at a lower cost. However, we need to keep on being vigilant and being active citizens to protect this fund from abuse.
What is your one key takeaway that you cannot forget, something that was really valuable in the conversation that was had today? Tell our viewers.
One thing that is valuable is that the National Infrastructure Fund does not divorce social gains and profit. What I've taken home is that there will be some projects that will be done on the budget, on the national budget, which perform a social role, such as rural electrification, education, and healthcare. And then we have commercial services that the government offers, such as water, electricity, and other utilities, which will now go to the commercial side. So I think this is a good initiative in that we will divorce these two and ensure that we get the best value for money for the projects and for the limited investment and capital that we'll receive through these funds and also through additional public debt.
Thank you very much. I really understood. Thank you very much. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine. You start by introducing yourself, then you'll tell us what expectations of today met when you came to this convening, the expectations that you had starting the meeting until right now. Were they met in the panel discussion that we had?
Hi guys, how are you? Happy Easter. My name is Joy Achungo. I'm the Executive Director of Arts for Impact Initiative. So of course, our major role in this convening was to do a game, and we have done it. On the event, it has been so amazing seeing individuals asking the right questions, especially on issues that directly affect us. And we've had such a diverse panel, which was so amazing. Of course, there are some questions that have not been answered, but I think it has formed a basis of asking the fundamental questions, especially the questions that concern money, taxes, and how the vision and the national goal and our national, I'm trying to find the right terms, but I'm really impressed because it is time we ask the fundamental questions and the right questions on where our country needs to be in the future.
So what is a specific question that maybe you feel was not answered, in one key takeaway you could tell the viewers that are at home that will benefit from watching this live?
Is the fund political? And of course, it is a question that everybody is trying to avoid, but the political conversation has to be there because we're talking about money, and anytime you're talking about money, you're also talking about interest. So, of course, the political question has not been answered yet. I'm really hoping it will be answered, and more individuals will also be asking the right questions on the politics behind the fund. But otherwise, I'm very impressed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
You'll introduce yourself, then you'll tell us if your expectations in this meeting convening today were met. Maybe the questions that we had and the discussion that happened here. What do you think about it?
Okay, my name is Mwende Mogambi, concerned citizen.
Yes.
And I feel like my expectations were met to some level because it's good to see when candid conversations are happening, and it's good to see when people are asking the necessary questions. But to some level, they weren't met. Because if you're a panelist in such a discussion, you don't get to say, you're not my target audience. You don't get to say, I won't speak to you. You don't get to say, I can't answer that, because you accepted to be here to sit down and to listen to their questions. So if the audience raises a question they feel is important to them, you don't get to, narrow down their question and say, okay, that's not important, or go back and read the bill. There's a reason you sat there. You're the expert and we're the listener. So I feel like that didn't quite match my expectation, but I would say the discussion was very, very nice.
So what is the one key takeaway that you'd want our viewers from home to know that people have not watched here?
I think the one key takeaway is do not sleep. This government, bro, hey, don't sleep. But you sleep, kidogo, they have done their thing. I think that's my biggest takeaway, that there's so much our government is doing, whether it's good for us or not, but we need to be very aware. We need to be awake to what's going on. Yes. And so my biggest takeaway, even aside from what the fund talks about, is we need to be very present in what's happening in the government. We need to be very involved. We need to ask questions. We need to be paid from the fund itself. It's a very beautiful thing. If it actually works, if it's actually going to be actualized in the correct way, it's going to work for the Kenyans. But if not, then we might find ourselves in more debt than we're already in. And there must be a lot of gray areas, a lot of, it's an open door to corruption. There's so many vague areas. So if those things are corrected, then it might actually be a very good thing for us and infrastructure in Kenya.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi. You'll start by introducing yourself, tell us your name, and maybe what expectations today met in this meeting, and what do you think about the conversation that was happening here today?
Okay, thank you. My name is Abna Kuzwayo. I'm the Executive Director at KenyaCommsHub. This is a youth organization. And coming into the conversation today, I was hoping to gain more insights into the National Infrastructure Fund, how it's going to work, how it's going to take care of my interests as a Kenyan citizen, and just going into how the conversation has panned out, and particularly for Mr. David Ndi. I think it's a comment that's even been raised to him. He was talking at us, not with us, and genuine questions were being raised regarding the National Infrastructure Fund, which would affect a lot of our economic interests. And even as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, in my mind I was specifically thinking public participation, public national interest, these are constitutionally enshrined principles. And throughout the conversation, throughout how he was discussing the fund as it is constituted, he was talking about money will be the guiding factor, economic interest. At the end of the day, we have a constitution that guides how such things are supposed to be working. So it's left me with a lot of questions, in the sense that if these are the people who are going to be implementing this, and their first instinct is economic interests, not the national interest, not matters of public participation, which are constitutionally enshrined principles, then it leaves me with a lot more questions than answers with regard to how this is going to be managed. But generally, I see there's a good idea there. There's areas for improvement generally, but looking forward to it, and as an advocate, possibly looking forward to this going to court, because I definitely see that it will go to court.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Expectations. Come. So hi. Hey. Tell us your name and maybe were your expectations met in this convening, and what do you think about the discussion that was happening in here?
Hi, I'm Mariga. Interesting discussion. I don't know if my expectations are met. Perhaps I had high expectations about a public officer speaking to the people and having an actual interaction with people as opposed to speaking down to them. But it was interesting in understanding the act more. If I ignore all the condescension, it was very educational.
Can you tell our viewers maybe a key takeaway that they can bank on, that maybe people who have not come listen to this whole panel? So what is the key takeaway you can tell them that this is what I have learned here that you can go home with?
A key takeaway is the government thinks that they know what's best for you and they don't care about us. But my key takeaway and my really big pushback to a lot of this is I oppose the way the public infrastructure fund works, especially in its relationship to privatization and the private solutions to public problems. What's eventually happening now is we are taking government debt off, but then translating it to individual debt. That's what's happening. You're taking the debt of government books, but eventually if your eventual solution is that all public assets need to be bankable and profit-making, it means that the people who pay it are the citizens. So eventually, whose debt are you taking off? Who are you serving? Because basically, you're just removing government debt to give it to individual debt and then calling that problem-solving. So I feel like I have so many objections to this project. It has nothing to do with implementation. Implementation is the farthest part about this. I'm in principle opposed to how it's run and the privatization of public services and what that will eventually do to each and every one of us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
So were your expectations met in this meeting?
Yeah, they were met. My name is Ben.
Yes. Oh. Okay. Just a minute. Yes.
Yeah, so my name is Ben, and I'm a software dev. My career is in software development, computer and stuff.
Yes.
So I basically came here to learn.
Yes. Were expectations met?
Yeah, they were met 100%.
Yes.
And I look forward to meeting you in the next many of these events.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That has been the big picture. Big conversations, big guests, and you're looking forward to listen for you. This is from us from Macmillan Library. Adios.